The general consensus among baseball fans is that Mike Trout is the best player in the sport right now and one of the best to ever play it. And in 2021, a healthy Shohei Ohtani is decimating the league in ways we've just never seen before, and it can be argued that he too is one of the most talented players ever. How many times in sports have we seen two of the most talented players in their sport's history together on the same team at their best at the same time? Not too often. Contrary to the opinions of ARP-eligible baseball fans, one player's inability to carry a team of 25 players to the postseason does not matter. I'll say it here on the record, that's a stupid argument. Mike Trout made his major league debut in 2011. In the 9 years before that point, the Angels made the playoffs 6 times, including a World Series win in 2002. Since Trout joined the team, they've made the playoffs only once. As of June 2021, Mike Trout has never won a playoff game in his major league career. One of baseball's greatest tragedies. We've already contextualized how good Trout is on this channel before, so we're going to first do the same for Ohtani. Then we'll talk about the Angels and their failures on the field. Then we're going to take a look at the entirety of sports history to see if anything like this has ever happened before. And then finally, I'll try and give some advice to the Angels on how they can fix this monumental disservice they've done to baseball. First things first, let's start with one of the most impressive men playing baseball right now.
No one man should have all that power.
Shohei Ohtani is so good. But how good is he? You see, this is the part where you guys say, but how good is he? Everyone knows that Shohei Ohtani is good at baseball, but contextualizing just how special he is a pretty hefty task. I guess I could start by asking you guys a question. Let me know the answer in the comments. What other player in Major League Baseball history was able to throw 100 on the mound while consistently hitting balls at 100 miles per hour? The answer is nobody. Shohei Ohtani made his first start on the mound this year on April 4th at home against the White Sox. In that game, he threw his hardest pitch at 100.6 miles per hour and followed it up by hitting a ball 115.2 miles per hour off of Dylan Cease over the right field wall. That was the first pitch he saw in the game, by the way. At this early point of the 2021 season, Ohtani had thrown the hardest pitch of any pitcher this season and hit the ball harder than any hitter this season. As of May 31st, these 5 have the hardest hits by exit velocity in 2021. We'll consider the top 6 just to get Nelson Cruz on here. Sitting at number 1 by a wide margin is Ohtani. The best pitcher on the Los Angeles Angels has hit the hardest hit of any player in Major League Baseball so far this year. And as you know, this is only a small piece of the puzzle. And before I see first name bunch of numbers complaining in the comment section, I have to point out that all of the stats included in this video are as of the morning of June 2nd, which is when the research for this video was finished. One of the many insane things about Shohei Ohtani is that he's not only a top slugger offensively, but a top slugger repellent on the mound. This season at the plate, Ohtani has hit the second most home runs in baseball, has the second highest amount of extra base hits in baseball, and is second in isolated power. On the mound, he has the 5th lowest slugging percentage against and the 9th lowest isolated power against. He's basically as good at slugging at the plate as he is at preventing it on the mound. I can't think of a single Major League Baseball player that's ever done something like this. He really is the alpha two-way player, although Jacob deGrom's getting up there too. So what else does Shohei bring to the mound? How about a 95.6 mile per hour average fastball as the main course, a slider with the 3rd highest average break of any slider in baseball for dessert, and, I don't know, maybe throw in the best splitter in the sport as an appetizer. Ohtani's signature splitter is his most effective pitch. Opposing batters have a .06 expected batting average against it. That's the 4th best pitch in baseball in this category. This means that of every 100 batted balls in play against Shohei Ohtani's splitter, 6 of them are expected to land for base hits. That's really good. That splitter has what's called a whiff percentage of 60.3%, which is the 3rd best of any pitch in baseball. This means that if a batter swings at a Shohei Ohtani splitter, they have only a 39.7% chance of making contact with it. That is also really good. Ohtani's splitter is the 3rd best pitch in baseball by expected weighted on-base average among pitches that have resulted in at least 25 plate appearances. It's the 2nd best behind Tyler Glasnow's curveball by strikeout rate and the best pitch in baseball by put-away percentage. This is the rate of 2-strike pitches that result in a strikeout, meaning his splitter is the most effective 2-strike pitch in all of baseball for producing strikeouts. And that, you guessed it, is really good. He's also got a secret curveball that's on average 21 miles per hour slower than his fastball, which makes for a fun time at the plate, to say the least. He rarely ever uses it though, but that surely didn't stop the team at MLB The Show from including it in the game.
I can't f***ing compete!
Opponents are batting .156 against him in general through 7 starts in 2021, with an expected batting average of .189, which is the 8th best among all pitchers with at least 150 plate appearances against. His 2.72 ERA gives him an ERA plus so far this season of .163. To reiterate, the American League runner-up in homers has an earned run average 63% lower than league average. Think about that. Though even if it weren't as good, I don't think a player like this needs to be Jacob deGrom on the mound to be considered a one-of-a-kind talent. He could be a Wade Miley on the mound and a Trent Grisham at the plate, and I think he'd still deserve every ounce of our praise. But the point is that Shohei Ohtani isn't just fine. Shohei Ohtani, along with Mike Trout, is a once-in-a-generation talent. But how can they both be once-in-a-generation talents when there are 2 of them? Well, I guess that's true. But either way, 2 insanely talented baseball players of historical magnitude are playing at their best on the same team at the same time. But, unfortunately for them, that team is the Los Angeles Angels. The Angels in the majority of the Trout era have been criminally mediocre. If mediocrity were a crime, Subway, Ant-Man and the Wasp, and the Angels would all be on the FBI's most wanted list. Since Trout debuted in 2011, the Angels have a 778 and 750 record, which isn't terrible, but when you have 2 of the most talented players in history on your team, it makes you seem closer to horrible than mediocre. Trout only played in 40 games in 2011, so let's look at the period from 2012 through 2020. When I think of the Angels' struggles, the first thing my brain always goes to is their pitching. But most years their offense hasn't been much help either. In the first 3 years of Trout, the Angels had a top-tier offense by Team WRC+, but since 2015, they have been painfully average at best. WRC+ is another stat with a trailing plus symbol, which means that 100 is average. Their 97 WRC+ in 2019 represents the fact that the 2019 Angels were 3% worse than average by this metric, because 97 is 3 less than 100. And their pitching hasn't been any better over this time. ERA minus is very similar to stats with a trailing plus. League average is still 100, but with ERA minus, the lower the better. A 97 ERA minus means that a pitcher's ERA was 3% lower than league average, which is better than having a 103 ERA minus, where a pitcher's ERA is 3% higher than league average. The best the Angels pitching staff has done since 2012 by ERA minus is 2% lower than league average. That's the best they've done. Pitching seems to be the premier problem for the Angels just about every year, whether it's injuries or just talent itself. If I asked you to name some top-tier starters since 2012 who were great in an Angels uniform, who comes to mind? Maybe Jared Weaver, Garrett Richards. They've had some decent years from others, but I can't think of a single other pitcher who's been consistently that good for them. Bartolo Colon should not be one of the first pitchers that comes to my mind when I try and think of solid seasons from an Angels starting pitcher. Bartolo Colon hasn't pitched for the Angels since 2007. And now let's look at their defense. Here you can see the outs above average for every Angel who played the most games at each position since it started being tracked in 2016. The number with the black outline is the cumulative outs above average for every Angel who played at the position between 2016 and 2020. In the outfield from left to right, it's Justin Upton, Mike Trout, and Cole Calhoun. In the infield from left to right, it's Yunel Escobar, Andrelton Simmons, Johnny Giavotella, and Albert Pujols. From 2016 through 2020, the Angels have a team outs above average of 1, and that's the 18th highest in Major League Baseball. That's 1 out above average. They have been the most average defensive team since outs above average started being tracked. Their team OAA has been dominated over the years by legendary shortstop Andrelton Simmons, and it's been pretty underwhelming for just about everybody else. Now this graphic does leave out somebody like David Fletcher, who produced 19 outs above average since his debut in 2018, which is easily the second best on the team, even starting 2 years before he had debuted. Fletcher plays a ton of positions and he moves around pretty frequently, so he just hasn't had enough time at one particular position to be included here. Regardless, now we know that in the past few years, all 3 of the Angels' offense, pitching, and defense has been mostly average or below. This level of play has made more apparent the contrast between Trout and Ohtani and everyone else, because you expect a team with those 2 to be so much better than it is. By everyone else, I'm referring to their teammates, but with regard to literally everyone else, as in every other human being ever, has anyone else in sports history as insanely good as these 2 are ever been subjected to this kind of mediocrity before? It's a good question, and we're going to have to look across all of time and space in order to answer it. So has anything like this ever happened before in history? We're going to have to do some serious work and look throughout the entire multiverse to even have a shot at finding something this extreme. There are a lot of factors to consider here when answering this question. How should we define what it means to waste a career? Are we going to consider historically good players who've made it to the playoffs a bunch of times but rarely ever won a championship? Is there some kind of an interaction we need to consider between how historically good one player is and how bad the team that they're playing for is? Well, forget all that complicated stuff. I'm going to keep it simple and just be generally subjective here and ask that you trust me. If you don't, that's fine too. You can stick around either way. I'm just going to look for cases as similar to this one as I can. Barring any extreme cases, generally, I'm only considering players that have made the playoffs no more than 3 times in their careers, extra points for never winning a playoff series, and even more points if they've never won a playoff game, and players whose teams were bad or mediocre more often than they were good. Because there are likely so few instances as extreme as this one, I'll consider cases with just one historically good player too, instead of 2. Please let me know in the comments if I do miss one, but keep in mind, before you do comment, I'm holding Trout and Ohtani in historically high regard in terms of talent, like top handful of players in the sport ever. So that level of talent, and of course, how infrequent these players were winning, are the key things I'm considering. So let's get started. It was a real shame that Ted Williams never won a World Series. The Hall of Famer played for the Boston Red Sox from 1939 to 1960, excluding the 43, 44, and 45 seasons while he served in World War II. Behind Barry Bonds' 2002 and 2004 seasons sits Ted Williams' 1941 campaign, in which he recorded the 3rd highest on-base percentage in a single season at .553. He had an OBP of .450 or higher in 15 consecutive seasons. Normally I'd make a fun graphic highlighting his best years, but Williams was so good that all I can really do to emphasize that fact is just show you his entire baseball reference page. He's widely considered one of, if not the greatest hitter in baseball history, but he only ever played in 1 postseason series. At the end of his career, Williams had won 6 batting titles and played in only 7 postseason games. Similar case so far, but there is a big problem. When Ted Williams was playing baseball, only the best record in the American and National Leagues got a spot in the playoffs and went straight to the World Series. So it was a lot harder to make it to the playoffs at this time than it is in today's game. Williams also didn't have an Ohtani to his Trout, but when talking about historically good players consistently missing out on the playoffs, it's hard to find a case where a player as good was out of the playoffs as often as Ted Williams was. But these Red Sox teams weren't as mediocre as the Angels of today. Today's Red Sox would have made the postseason at least 6 or more times with the records of those Williams teams, so let's try and find something more similar. It's time to talk football. Former Detroit Lions wide receiver Calvin Johnson had played for some pretty bad Lions teams. In the early 2010s, Calvin Johnson was not only considered one of the best wide receivers in football, but maybe the best non-quarterback in the NFL. Even with all that talent, Johnson wound up playing in only 2 playoff games in his 9-year career. This is a good case to include for a couple of reasons. His career lasted 9 seasons, which is almost as long as Mike Trout's up to 2021, and they both have a similar amount of playoff experience in that similar time frame. Johnson's relatively short career takes him down a few rankings on a lot of all-time wide receivers lists, but in terms of raw talent alone, he could easily be a top 3 wide receiver in NFL history. So a historical talent for sure. Johnson holds the record for the most receiving yards ever in a single season. But in the same year he broke that record, the Lions still managed to go 4-12. Over Johnson's 9-year career, the Lions went 54-90, had only 2 winning seasons, and had the dreadful 0-16 record in 2008. One of football's greatest wide receivers never got his fair shot at consistent winning. With regard to his career franchise, this wasn't even the first time the Lions had wasted a generational talent. Hell, this wasn't even the only time they'd done it in the last 20 years. Barry Sanders found himself in a similar situation with the Lions in the 1990s. Both Johnson and Sanders being one of the greatest running backs of all time, both retired early, and both cited the team's poor performance as one of the reasons why. Both Detroit Lions, both among the top tier of the greatest ever at their positions, both retiring at age 30, both fed up after having their careers wasted by their only team. It really must suck to be a Lions fan.
Hey Ninja, how did the Lions do today?
Oh my. What'd you say to me, you little...
The Lions haven't done much to fix the franchise since Calvin Johnson retired in 2016. Since then, they've had 2 winning seasons, another first-round exit in their only playoff appearance, and have gone 8-23 over the last 2 years. This is a good case study about what happens when teams don't do what needs to be done to build a winning team around their superstars. This is a better comparison, I think, than the Ted Williams example, but this video is about Mike Trout and Shohei Ohtani. The Angels aren't just wasting one superstar, they're wasting 2 of them. So I really want to look further to try and find an example of this happening with 2 players of that caliber. So let's keep going. Now back to baseball. I'm sure the Mariners and Cubs are 2 teams most people think of when they think of historically struggling franchises. The Seattle Mariners haven't been to the postseason in 19 years, which is by far the longest drought in baseball right now. The Cubs went 108 years without a World Series win before their 2016 title, which was the longest drought in the history of all of sports, and it's not like these teams haven't been blessed with historic talent over the years. Randy Johnson, Alex Rodriguez, Ken Griffey Jr., and Edgar Martinez all played for the Mariners in the late 1990s, and it didn't even take a full decade for an international superstar and another future Hall of Famer to show up at their doorstep. The Cubs, on the other hand, haven't been as lucky, and that's over a much longer lifespan. They've still been able to enjoy the likes of players like Sammy Sosa, Ryne Sandberg, and who can forget superstar Cap Anson besides everybody? Those 90s Mariners teams, with all of those historical talents, made the playoffs 4 times in 7 years, winning 3 playoff series along the way, so they don't really apply here. They did have Ichiro and Beltre on the team a decade later, as I mentioned, but Beltre's career had seen better days both before and after Seattle with the Dodgers and Rangers. So the Mariners never really got to see peak Adrian Beltre, another caveat preventing me from considering them here. I kept striking out to find a similar situation to that of Trout and Ohtani with the Angels, but the closest one I could find is what the Cubs wound up doing with Hall of Famers Ron Santo and Ernie Banks. These were the first 2 teammates I could find with that unique combination of being historically good while never getting a chance to win. Ernie Banks was the first of the 2 to debut in 1953. Ron Santo debuted in 1960 and retired in 1974. From Banks' debut in 1953 to Santos' retirement in 1974, the Cubs never made the playoffs. Not once. Major League Baseball added an extra playoff spot for both leagues in 1969, but the Cubs still couldn't make it. Chicago didn't reach the postseason again until 1984, which means that they went 39 years without making the playoffs. This included 15 losing seasons out of 22 between the debut of Banks and the retirement of Santo. Santo and Banks played for some really bad Cubs teams, and neither got the chance to play in a single playoff game. So they do fit what we're looking for in that department. But were they really historical talents? A popular statistic to evaluate Hall of Fame worthiness is called JAWS. This metric averages a player's career WAR with their 7-year peak WAR, and is used to compare a player to the average Hall of Famer at his position to evaluate their worthiness. JAWS doesn't account for things like postseason performance though, but choosing to spend your career playing for the Chicago Cubs will fix that right up for you. Ron Santo has the 7th highest career JAWS of any third baseman ever, and has the 4th highest 7-year peak WAR of any third baseman ever. Whereas Ernie Banks had the 8th highest JAWS of any shortstop ever, and the 5th highest 7-year peak WAR of any shortstop ever. These 2 infielders were among the best to ever play their positions. I don't think either were anywhere near as talented as Trout or Ohtani are today, but they were both still Hall of Famers and historical talents at their respective positions. But even with all of that checked off, the career peaks of Ernie Banks and Ron Santo were slightly out of phase, so they were never both at their best at the same time. While this is the most similar case I could find to what we're witnessing with Trout and Ohtani, it is still not as egregious. So I've gone through sports history to try and find another instance of a team with 2 of the most talented players in their sports history doing historically good things at the same time and going nowhere. I've looked through 14,605 alternate realities throughout the multiverse of sports, and I just can't find one where anything like this has happened. It does not seem like there have ever been 2 players as talented as Mike Trout and Shohei Ohtani that have been wasted quite like this. I hope this hits home that we are all witnesses to a truly historic disservice in the history of sports. The Angels are beyond lucky to have these 2, but as far as luck goes, that's about all they've got of it. So the only question we have left to answer is this: how the heck do they fix it? In order to try and solve a problem, we first need to identify some of its causes. We know their offense, pitching, and defense have all been lackluster as a whole in recent years, so that doesn't really narrow things down much. There is something the Angels do that we haven't talked about yet that I think has actually hurt the team a hell of a lot in the last decade. And that's, wait for it, spending money.
We'll take 20.
A big part of what makes the Angels such a frustrating case study is that they have money. They have spent a hell of a lot of money in recent years and have still gotten nowhere. Spending money can obviously be a very good thing for a baseball team, but only if you spend that money the right way. Spending money the wrong way is probably worse than not spending money at all. The 2021 Angels have the 6th highest payroll in baseball, and right now are 4 times less likely to make the postseason as the Cleveland Indians, a franchise who spends less on their team than your little cousin spends on V-Bucks. Like a lunatic stockpiling gasoline in plastic bags, the Angels have made their own questionable decisions with capital in the Trout era. Let's just go through some of the big money moves they've made in the recent past. In 2011, the Angels signed 3-time MVP winner Albert Pujols to a 10-year, $246 million contract that would keep him in Los Angeles through 2021. Now, Pujols definitely deserved a payday, but a 10-year deal for any player is risky, especially when that player is 32 in year 1. Most of you know that contract today is looked at as one of the worst ever signed. They followed up that deal by going out and signing rival ace pitcher C.J. Wilson for 5 years and almost $80 million. He ended up never pitching as good as he did in Texas and didn't even make it to year 5 of that deal. There were some warning signs for both Pujols and Wilson in their contract years too. The next year they committed $125 million to Josh Hamilton. Hamilton was an MVP at this point, but it took only 2 years for the contract to turn into one of baseball's worst. They acquired Justin Upton in late 2017 and re-signed him for 5 years and $106 million. And it was looked at pretty positively when the deal was made. He did his thing in 2018, he was hurt in 2019, had an OBP in the 200s in the shortened season last year, and it's the same story so far this year. Unless Upton can turn it around, this will be another big dough deal to tack onto this list. They handed Zach Cozart a 3-year deal in 2017, and he was just dreadful in his time there. Only made it 2 years. They signed Anthony Rendon to a 7-year, $245 million deal, and signed Mike Trout to a 12-year, $426 million deal. Not sure yet how those will work out, but I think it's safe to say that at least one of those two looks promising. Even some of the shorter-term, low-risk deals they've handed out have done nothing but hurt them. 1-year deals like the ones they gave out over the years to Jesse Chavez, Ben Revere, Matt Harvey, Trevor Cahill, Cody Allen, Justin Bour, Jonathan Lucroy, losing my breath just going through this list. Not a single player I just mentioned put up a positive WAR in an Angels uniform. I'm not saying the Angels don't do anything right, like at least they signed Ohtani. You could debate if all of the contracts I mentioned really are that bad, but the fact that the Angels have dedicated hundreds of millions of dollars to players over the years and have still done next to nothing with them shows at the very least that their strategy just isn't working. As you can clearly see, the Angels have money. They've shown that they have no problem handing out big contracts to players. But if that hasn't really worked out for them as a whole, maybe it's time to start using that money elsewhere. Go put more of that poorly invested capital into something like funding state-of-the-art minor league facilities and player development staff. Doing so would give them access to more internal talent with less risk instead of taking chances on external options, something that's pretty consistently not worked out for them. Sure, easier said than done, but what they've been doing doesn't seem to be working. Last year's A New Day in Dodger Town, which I released almost a year ago to the day, has a ton of information about how the Dodgers have nailed player development so well, and it's something the Angels could definitely learn from. MLB.com ranked the Angels farm system the 6th worst in baseball going into 2021. It looks like if the Angels want a brighter future, they're going to have to either A, learn a thing or two about player development from their buddies across the way in LA, or B, they're just going to have to keep throwing money at guys until enough contracts work out in their favor. Neither of those two options makes me more hopeful for the near futures of Trout and Ohtani on this team. I'm not too familiar with the business side of a front office, but the Angels could try throwing some of their big money at successful team executives and other solid staff options from around the league. See if you can lure any solid front office personnel away from their clubs and help build a winner in LA. Maybe this isn't plausible, again I'm not sure, but we know what happens when the leaders of an organization don't know how to lead. So overspending on some good scouts, player development heads, and other team executives could be a positive way to phase out some bad habits. Whether the Angels of the future are going to acquire players through free agency, trade, or develop from within, the focus should be on pitching. I hope the Angels would sign Trevor Bauer last offseason before he eventually chose the Dodgers and that fell through. They can do better than the rotation they have right now. I really need to be able to name more good Angels pitchers a decade from now than I'm able to right now from the previous one. Now it's been a pretty long video, and I appreciate you sticking around this long, but I have one more thing I want to show you. The following graphics are from a 2017 Fangraphs article. On your screen now are all players who accrued at least 50 F-WAR in their careers through age 30 from 1969 to 2017. If you updated this list for 2021, Mike Trout would be second on it, and this is only his age 29 season. He'll blow by the number 1 spot after his age 30 season next year, which is just unbelievable. Now check out the 4th and 5th columns for Mike Trout compared to everybody else. Yeah, and here's another. These are the players with the highest career F-WAR who had never won a postseason game through 2017. Banks and Santo are the 2 highest teammates on this list. Trout's is now up to 78 in 2021. Mike Trout has the highest career F-WAR of any player in Major League Baseball history without a single playoff win. And it's unfortunate that I could see a healthy Shohei Ohtani joining this list at some point down the line. Now maybe the Angels play better the rest of the way this year. This is baseball, a sport that had current Angel Anthony Rendon's old club in Washington dead in the water by the end of May in 2019 with the bullpen equivalent of burnt toast, and they still won the whole thing. Anything can happen, and I would love to be proven wrong, but after everything I've seen from the Angels, I will not be holding my breath. Let's revisit an important lesson we learned from the 2005 White Sox video. Baseball's a team sport, but unlike other team sports, one man can't carry a team to a deep postseason run. Mike Trout may be the greatest player in baseball history. Shohei Ohtani is a dominant force unlike anything we've ever seen before. Neither of them have ever had a shot at a deep postseason run. And there's a non-zero chance they may not for a while. Baseball isn't basketball. The titans of this sport just can't do it alone, and this is all the proof you need. A final word to the Angels. No sports team in history has ever had this kind of an opportunity before and has wasted it quite like this. And it is your responsibility to baseball and its fans to do right by them. These two deserve better, and I hope for nothing more than for you to stop letting them down. It's time to get to work.